All right. There we go. So as I said before, this training is really going to talk more about what does it mean to be in trauma-informed community. So the two previous trainings we did really talked about what does it just mean to be trauma-informed in general? Just what is it, what is that term? What's that concept? What does that look like in an individual? And then we also talked about what does it mean to be a trauma-informed organization or an agency? What does that actually look like in the setting that I might work in or interact in? So today is really focusing more on that community level. So if you've seen me present prior to this training, you've seen this slide before. And I want to actually spend some time on this and just, especially thinking about the train the trainer we're about to do. Whenever I am facilitating a meeting or a group or a presentation such as this, whether it's in person or Zoom, I always make sure at the front end of the training that I'm very kind of clear with my expectations, and I also let individuals know what to expect, and also that it's okay and important to take care of yourself throughout this time together if you need to. It's absolutely okay if you want to keep your camera on or if you want to turn it off. Please know that at any point, if you need to get up and you need to stretch or you need to use the restroom or grab a glass of water, it's absolutely okay. I want to make sure that you are doing what you need to do to take care of yourself during this time together, so that you can be well and stay attuned, and really just making sure that you're keeping yourself filled up. So whenever I present, I always, if I'm using a slide deck, especially the virtual, I'll include a slide like this on the front end, just reminding people to know that it's okay to take a break. If I'm presenting in person, I usually just say that. And I've also really intentionally set the room up in a certain way so that people feel cared for kind of in that space and know, again, just kind of know what the expectations are. Because I'm already coming in with this mindset of being trauma informed. So even the way I'm running a meeting is using that trauma informed lens. So this definition, so when we get back to thinking about what is a trauma informed community, this definition is on the SAMHSA website. They actually have a section on trauma informed communities. So in a second, I'll show the slide where we talk about just what does it mean to be trauma informed. But when we talk about trauma informed resilient community, this is the definition that they use. And I think it's great. So it's building resilient and trauma informed communities is essential to improving public health and well-being. Communities can be places where traumatic events occur, but they can also help keep us safe. They can be a source of trauma, but they can also buffer us against the negative effects of adversity. Communities can collectively experience trauma, much like individuals do, but they can also be a resource for healing. So again, in much of this work, there's this balance between, again, how we can be impacted by this work, but so it not only can be a potentially traumatizing thing, but it also can be an opportunity for healing and growth and resilience. And we're going to talk more about that in detail, about what that actually looks like on the ground level. So again, just to ground us in this work, if you've seen me present before, I often will reuse some of these slides because I don't think it hurts to just keep reminding us of what this is. So for having this kind of lens of being trauma informed and aware, we are always recognizing that ourselves and those around us are often carrying these invisible bags, that we are carrying these invisible bags with us, filled with things that others might not be able to see, but it's what we carry. And we're going to share what that is. I've used this slide as well, that the iceberg image, which is just another way of talking about, you often just see us at the top of that iceberg, just just a small glimpse of what we're shown, but there's so much more to us that's going on underneath the surface that you're often not aware of. And these are often some of the things that we're carrying. So anywhere from some of those individual experiences that we might have experienced during childhood and beyond. So with the leaves of the tree, which are kind of those original ACEs or adverse childhood events. But we're not only experiencing those things individually, there's also adverse community experiences. So thinking about what we've just gone through this year with this global pandemic, or the impacts of the climate crisis, or just any impacts of environmental stress, but then also the roots of the tree. And the roots of the tree are just this additional layer of adversity that people are carrying on top of all of the other things. So from structural racism to the impact of poverty and socioeconomic status, and then the things that are connected to that, which could be food scarcity, lack of affordable or quality housing, substandard wages, schools that are substandard, poor water, air quality. So many of these things, when I think about just the region that I live in the city of Richmond, those roots are just so heavily prevalent and almost above the surface right now. So in addition to, the issues that might be connected to us with, like I said, individual traumas, we also are enduring, and many of us are enduring so much more, those roots. So again, all of these things, I say all of this to say, these are all of those things that are in those bags that we carry. All of these things are underneath the surface of that iceberg, of ourselves, of our neighbor, of our colleague, our staff. These are the things that we are often carrying. And the last slide that I'm just going to reuse is this one around SAMHSA's 4 key elements and 6 principles. So if you've seen me present, you've seen this one before. But again, if we're using kind of that definition of what is being trauma informed, it's initially those 4 R's, which is the center of the circle. We're realizing the impact and the prevalence and all those different things that we're carrying in those bags, so all those potentially traumatizing events. We're recognizing what that may look like on ourselves as an individual, but also an organization level or community level. And then if we have this awareness, we're going to hopefully respond by integrating that knowledge into improving the practices and policies within our organizations or our community or individually. And whenever possible, we are going to try to resist adding more trauma and more stress. And again, I say whenever possible. And then surrounding that inner circle is, again, kind of some of the approaches that we would hope that we would be doing in the work that we're doing. Whenever possible, creating opportunities for collaboration, peer support, whenever possible, being trustworthy and transparent, promoting physical and psychological safety, providing empowerment and voice and choice so that people have an opportunity to have input. And then always addressing cultural, historical, and gender issues in all of the work that we do. So SAMHSA on their website has those 6 principles connected to what that looks like at a community level. And this is what they say. So we're thinking about a trauma-informed community. and we're looking at it in the framework of safety, we're hopefully that community is working towards trying to prevent violence across the lifespan and creating safe physical environments whenever possible. That community is hopefully trying to foster positive relationships among residents and local government, police, schools, and other community sectors. We're really trying to ensure opportunities for growth are available for all citizens of that community, that it's equitable, that we're promoting, that trauma-informed community is promoting involvement of residents and partnerships among agencies. So there's this cross-sector community involved collaboration. People aren't just working in their individual silos or neighborhoods, that there is this cross-sector collaboration happening. The trauma-informed community engages residents to work together on issues of common concern. And a trauma-informed community values and supports history, culture, and diversity. So thinking about your community, what does that look like? And again, that's going to look very different in many different communities. So as I was kind of pulling these slides together for what I was going to present today, I came across actually a couple quotes. The first one was actually on one of the SAMHSA's references, but it talked about if you're trying to prevent and mitigate the impact of ACEs, right? If you're trying to prevent the impact of those, that image of the three realms of ACEs, right? If you're trying to hopefully prevent and lessen the impact, best practice would be trying to have a strategic approach that links all community sectors together around the effects of trauma while preventing gaps in services for clients. We're going to talk in a few minutes about what that would look like. Then the second quote I came across yesterday in an article that I was reading, and it's actually from Nadine Burke-Harris, and she shared this actually this week. So Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris is the Surgeon General of California. She's also kind of the star of the Resilience documentary, and she has a very famous TED Talk that many of you may have seen. But she's a pediatrician out in the outskirts of San Francisco. And she mentioned that recognizing the importance of joining a trauma-informed network of care to provide and coordinate buffering resources across sectors. So if you're really trying to prevent and mitigate the impact of ACEs, she's just talking about the importance of having some type of trauma-informed network of care, right? That's going to work collaboratively, cross-sector, getting, again, people out of these silos, sharing information, sharing resources, working together, that can help with coordinating buffering resources. So things that will help to build resilience. So again, her quote really kind of validates some of the work or things that we're trying to do with our trauma-informed community networks. So how do we do this, right? So if you're wanting to be a trauma-informed resilient community, what does that look like? What would we be doing, right? So if you're working towards kind of preventing and mitigating the impact of ACEs, individual and community ACEs, what can we do as a community? So spreading the knowledge, about trauma and its impact on children and families. So really creating an opportunity to develop a shared language around the community. So spreading awareness, even just on the topic. So if you think back a few weeks ago when we did that presentation on just what does it mean to be trauma informed, it's really spreading information about trauma and resilience. What does it mean? And helping people understand kind of what it is, how we're impacted, what it looks like, why it matters. So spreading knowledge about trauma and its impact. And the way you spread that knowledge can look different. Doesn't necessarily have to be a formal training or a presentation. It can be in your day-to-day exchange you have with your friend or your peers or your colleague, where this comes up. There's a book right now that you may have seen talked about in the news. Oprah has a new book called What Happened to You? And that's exactly, what she's doing is spreading knowledge about the trauma and its impact on children and families and adults. And she's, her book really is taking that trauma informed approach of, instead of what's wrong with you, but what happened to you, and just talking about the lifelong impact early childhood trauma can have, and also what's helped to build resilience and what's helped individuals to thrive. So the second piece, building this, trauma-informed resilient communities, examining current practices, really assessing, your current practices and policies, like with when you're interacting with children and families who've experienced trauma. So this kind of goes back to kind of what we talked about in the previous training about a trauma-informed organization. What are your current practices, policies that you currently have in place when it comes to working with children, families, and adults for that matter? What does that look like? Are there things within your practice that might be adding additional trauma or additional stress? So really kind of assessing what you're currently doing, and are there opportunities to change and to do things a little bit different. Identifying needs for trauma-informed services. So again, that's kind of part of that assessment. Like, where are the gaps? Where are kind of the gaps in our community? Like, where are we kind of missing the mark and really need to, bring in additional resources or build up the capacity of the individuals we have in our community so that they can better support those that are experiencing or have experienced adversity. But it starts with kind of identifying where those needs are and where those gaps are. Creating trauma-informed service systems. So really looking at the individual system or organization, and really starting to shift some of the practices. So again, this kind of goes back to what we've talked about previously, just how do we change the way, our schools are responding to children's behavior, or our juvenile justice system, the way we're looking at, again, an individual child or family's experience, our child welfare system, so really looking at the current practices that we have in place in these systems, and how can we create opportunities to really improve that practice. And then again, planning for the unified collaboration across systems. But how do we do all of this? In one way to do that is creating that, as Nadine Burke-Harris called, a trauma-informed system of care or network of care, trauma-informed network, or some communities call it a community resilience network, your Eastern Shore Healthy Communities, but it's some type of coalition, like this multi-sector kind of coalition that's coming together with this shared vision, right? So this shared vision of building a more resilient, a more healthier community. And with many of these types of networks that exist, there's some key elements that help these types of coalitions be able to sustain themselves. And some of those key elements are having some type of a leadership or backbone organization, and that can look very different in each community. But having multi-sector, multi-system collaboration and community involvement. So again, moving out of these silos, that this isn't just a child welfare, coalition or just a schools coalition, but this is a community coalition that's made up of all the different systems and sectors that are in any community. Um, and that there's inclusive and equitable membership, that it's not just made up of just all of these professionals at a table or leaders of these organizations, that there's people at different levels that are part of this network, that there's community voice at the table, that there's, again, like ability for everyone in the community to have an opportunity to provide input, and identifying kind of the community's strengths and needs. So kind of going back to what does our community need? What does this look like? So really assessing kind of where are those gaps? Where are we doing really well? Where are we thriving? Where are some of the issues that are presenting themselves as areas of concern in our community? And again, this can look very different in the city of Richmond or Eastern Shore or Hampton Roads or far Southwest Virginia. But the bottom line is to have, again, just this multi-sector, community involved collaboration, having, centered around this common agenda or vision, right, of trying to build a more resilient community, by working together to hopefully prevent, or at least mitigate or lessen the impact of ACEs and trauma. That that there's ongoing kind of communication and engagement across, this network, that you're, coming together to share information, to keep people informed. That can look very different. There could be many different ways you can do that. It could be, as I was referencing before, like how you spread awareness. It could be through hosting community events. It could be going in and giving individual, talks or discussions in specific organizations or settings. It can be just, as I shared earlier, just having that, these side conversations with your friends and just, or family or colleagues. It can be hosting a film screening, of, like, say, the documentary Resilience that talks about this information. It can be doing a public service announcement on your local public access or public TV station or radio station, with information about this. There's so many different ways to keep people aware and engaged and communicate this information. There's so many different ways to continue to spread awareness, and create that shared language across the community. But it's so important that you're doing it on a kind of a consistent basis and at least small doses of information, that you're not just hosting one event or one training and that's it, that there needs to be kind of this ongoing exchange of information or this ongoing dosing of information with people. So even if it's just a little tidbit or a quote that you want to share, or a snippet from Oprah's new program that she has on what happened to you, but just sharing that, little bits of information over time is going to help people to really, for this information to really resonate, for it really to take hold, and for them to really, for this really to start to potentially change. So another, this is kind of an infographic that's just kind of, again, kind of reiterates some of the things that I said. When you're thinking about a trauma-informed and resilient community, these are some of the ways you can go about creating that. So again, having some type of a network that's kind of leading these efforts, that's cross-sector. In the educate bubble, that's really where you're trying to spread that awareness. You're trying to get that information out to your community and to your fellow neighbors about what this is and why this matters and why all of us have a role to play. That this just isn't things that just affect people in that neighborhood or down the road, that it affects us, it affects our families, it affects, it's in all of us in many different ways. Many of us are carrying those invisible bags. Some of us have heavier bags than others, but we all have some stuff in our bag. So creating some type of mechanism for information sharing. So that's what that education bubble is. So they give an example of creating a speakers bureau, or there's people in your community that can give talks or presentations or coffee chats about this stuff. Engage, finding ways for people to get engaged, to be involved, to have a role in this. So it could be engaging, with local government, engaging, the different sectors, as we said before, engaging school board, engaging, all the different individuals that are involved that could potentially help to improve the practices and policies that are in your region. Could be telling your own story in hosting events or celebrating, opportunities to demonstrate resilience and what makes your community strong and thriving. A big getting people activated, getting people involved. And again, you can do that through kind of these types of coalitions. So, as you said before, I'm the coordinator for the statewide network of these trauma-informed community networks, these coalitions. And each of these coalitions have, like I said, they might have a different name. Some call themselves Community Resilience Network or Trauma-Informed Community Network or TICN for short, or Eastern Shore Healthy Families. I mean, they're all different, but they all kind of have this shared vision. And there's currently 26 around the state and 3 more that are about to, that are in the process of being developed. So it'll be 29, but they're in all different regions of the state. But as we shared earlier, I mean, they all kind of have this shared vision, trying to spread awareness in their community. Each one does it a little bit different of how they do it, and really trying to work to improve practices and policies in their community. That could be adding additional trauma. That could be really directly connected to the roots of that tree we shared. And I know in Richmond, that's a massive, massive problem and is something that we're actively involved in. But every community, there's the roots that need to be addressed and many of those other issues as well. But coming together as a collective where you're working together collectively and collaboratively across these sectors with community involvement, with lots of different shared ideas, can help to improve that practice. And this is just another kind of way of looking at it. So I'm going to pause and stop share. And I would like to kind of open it up for more of a discussion this time, and just to talk about questions that have come up, thoughts that have come up when you're thinking about your own community, and some of the things that I touched on when we're talking about being a trauma-informed resilient community. If just anything that stood out to you, or just thoughts when you're just thinking about what this looks like in your community, or just ideas moving forward. And it's okay to unmute yourself.
Okay, everybody is being very shy, and I will start.
Okay.
But I really hope people will contribute to this. We've two work groups that within Eastern Shore Healthy Communities, one on poverty and one on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Melissa has helped to guide as we've developed some of these things. And she says that within the Richmond Ticken, that those are subgroups of trauma. We actually explore a variety of avenues within those, but I just want to suggest to everyone that if you know anything about ALICE, asset limited, income constrained, employed, the United Way acronym for people who are just not making it, not being able to put away money for an emergency, not able to, fix the car if it breaks down. We have over 51% of our community that fall into that. That is trauma. When your day-to-day living expenses, when your children who want to play soccer can't afford shoes or equipment, that is trauma. When we live in a community that's, I forget the statistic, but the number of Black individuals in our community who have suffered historic and systemic racism, and we don't understand that, that is trauma, and we need to deal with that. When we work with school systems who, I don't know, kind of bully their way through a lot of issues, and that's me being very real. It's been my experience. That is trauma. When we have working communities, communities of people who are sort of isolated, low income, don't have paved roads, still have dirt roads. When it rains, their children have to walk in the mud to catch the school bus. That is trauma. So if we look at the 10 ACEs of abuse, neglect, and problems in the home, that's just such a limited subset of the range of trauma that we have in our community. When you work for an organization that says, okay, if you get COVID, fine, go home, be sick for 5 days and come back to the workplace, that is trauma. So we have our work cut out for us, folks. And I'm just going to shut up now and see if anybody else can add to that.
This is Tracy. I just think it's important not to make people feel so much like a victim, like something's wrong with you. It's good to have compassion for people and the things that they go through and so forth, but you don't want to be like, oh my God, you had a horrible life, this or that, it's almost like seeing somebody in a wheelchair and having that pity. Nobody wants that pity. And I think we need to be more inspirational to people and say, yeah, you got this, whatever, everybody has their thing, but that doesn't mean that you can't be successful. It doesn't mean that you can't be intelligent. It doesn't mean that you can't take care of yourself. So as we go out, just keep that in mind. We don't want to be belittling of, oh my God, I feel sorry for you. You had such a hard life. You have all this, as a person of color, I don't like that. I don't want anybody feeling sorry for me or thinking that I can't take care of myself. So just wanted to put that out there.
Oops. Tracy, I honestly apologize to you if that's how that came off. It is not at all what I meant to say.
No, not from you, but just in the mindset of how we're trained in a educational public health setting. That's how we are trained, to see people, and even myself, and so I have to be careful with that. And I kind of, from some of the people that I've met across the Bay, some of the comments that they've made me really think about that, and how when we come to someone, we don't want to make them feel as if they're, they have some kind of an ailment, like you have an ailment because of whatever. But no, you don't need to ever apologize. I am pretty tough. No worries. I know your heart.
And I thank you.
If I could just echo on what Tracy was saying, I think that's why your train the trainer event could be so important,
Mhm.
that we can empower people to carry it within our own communities
Yep.
rather than have experts that feel like you're coming in to fix folk, where we can get these groups to kind of be organically grown from within. And and so I'm real interested in the train the trainer, and I would like to, if I could, to get copies of what you've already done. It sounds great, but I agree with Tracy. I think if it comes from the outside and you're gonna keep hitting people over the head about how bad things are that they've got, it turns more people off than gets them involved in what's going on.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So I am going to share all of this stuff, but it's really meant for not for you to take the information and train it like me, like you said. Like it's really just here's some information that I sometimes include, but then how do you tell your own story? How do you tell, again, it's about building people up from within the community. I can't come in I don't live in Eastern Shore. I don't have a connection. I'm giving you some information here, but it's really for you to take it and make it your own. And yeah, so I appreciate you sharing that.
Hi, I also just wanted to say, like I've been in social work for about 15 years now. So seeing the development of like trauma-informed care practices has changed a lot. It wasn't really even a thing back then. You knew about it, but it wasn't necessarily labeled the same way. But I think that making sure you create a safe space for your customers is really important. And echoing, I believe, the person who just spoke prior, being compassionate and also working towards preventing re-traumatizing, because that can also be a big thing. You might not even be aware that you're doing it, but re-traumatizing can be big for some people as well.
Yeah, like whenever possible, how are we not adding additional stress or trauma? And I think that's something that we can always just kind of have in the back of our head, like just when we were thinking about just our day-to-day job or the role that we play. Just are there things that I'm doing that might be inadvertently adding more stress or adding more trauma? And you can start to change some of your own, at least your individual practice.
We looked at it the
I think-
other way and looked at where people have been successful that had trauma. Have you looked at it on the resilience side and trying to build more resilient structure in communities?
Right. And I think that's something that, especially when you're thinking about like what are the next steps for your community or for your individual organization, making sure that is at the forefront. How are you building up protective factors? How it's not just about, like you said before, just telling people about all the bad stuff that's happened to them and how, but it's really how are we kind of building up those buffers? How are we building up opportunities for people to be successful? How are we, like I said, kind of building those protective factors, making sure that, in our treatment approaches that aren't just punitive, that they're, what are we doing kind of within our schools, within child welfare, within our mental health system, within our healthcare system that's helping to build up individuals and not just, making sure that our first approach isn't just giving medication for something that we're seeing, that it's not, expelling or suspending a child, that it's, what are the other strategies that we can do to help build up, right? To build resilience or build protective factors.
So for me, with this session, our goals here are how do we take our community? So the community is comprised of individuals and sectors. How do we approach now at the highest level of the community? So for example, county boards of supervisors, school boards, things that, towns, things that represent large segments of our whole community. How do we approach them and talk about the things that underpin resilience in the community, things that underpin organizational and individual success? So that's what my focus is here today with this. What does it mean to be a trauma-informed community?
Not sure if anyone had already said this, but possibly creating an outlet for the community members to express their trauma, whether it's peer support networks or investing or partnering with different community health groups, but just being able to have an outlet for the community to express that.
Melissa, this is Kathy Lewis.
Mhm.
I'm sorry I've had other traffic, but I did want to share. I think it's really important that as people in the community who are, perhaps in some leadership roles, we just need to realize that a lot of places that we ask people to come and go are really not safe places for them. And I think we need to think about that when we think about our frontline people who are meeting and greeting, and just really convey that, you're welcome here. We want you here. And I just feel like that's really important.
I think that's an incredibly important point. And then again, if you want to even just like pick that apart, it's really then would go back to like, all right, well, as you're kind of assessing the different spaces in your community where people are often coming and going and engaging, what is it about that setting that makes it unsafe? So really kind of assessing and really looking at, what is it about that place that does make it unsafe? Who are the people that have the opportunity to really be able to implement some of those changes? How can you bring awareness to this to them? How can you bring this information to them, those people that are in positions where they can make those decisions to change the spaces? You could be involved in that, like even just bringing this information to those decision makers, to get them to start to buy in, and then, being able to offer suggestions often. But I think all of us have a potential role. So even if we don't work in that specific setting, we are, we can potentially try to, build those relationships with those people that do work in that setting to help potentially make change. There's so many different avenues that you can kind of come at it from. But again, it starts with kind of noticing, like what you just mentioned, Kat, like noticing some of those spaces, or noticing some of those issues or policies that are concerning and might be adding more trauma or adding more stress or doing harm. That's part of what you can talk about kind of as your network, and then problem solve. Okay, what are going to be some of those action steps that we can do?
One thing I've noticed where I live is it's really very rural here, and a lot of people have second homes. Kind of reminds me of the Eastern Shore. And with COVID, what a lot of people did was they moved out of the city, and they've moved, it seems to be permanently, into their second homes. And so something that's happening in the community is people who have suffered no less trauma in their lives, because money doesn't solve all kinds of issues, but I've noticed that there's a couple of things here that I'd like to get involved with to kind of help people understand that the trauma that comes from living rural and living, really in the poverty zone, and, doesn't make you any less of a person. And, it's great. I've, met some great people here. But the new people moving in don't understand a lot of, what's happening. And they were, lucky enough to live in more affluent areas of the city where they didn't have to worry about, necessarily being shot or, being attacked and so, I think that's something that we're going to find in all rural areas because people are moving in. There's the flight to escape the plague, basically. And so, we're getting different opinions on things. I noticed locally, and I still keep, notice of what's happening on the Eastern Shore. And I see the same thing happening there. We need to bring these two groups of people together and help them to understand that, everybody's worthy. Everybody has something to bring to the table. Everybody's got a skill set.
Mhm. And those individuals don't have roots in the community, as you said, and making sure that there are opportunities. So if it is partnering with local government or whoever, like to make sure that the community also has a voice in and why that's important and why that matters.
I have kind of a crazy question, a thought that just came to my mind. Do you ever worry about missing trauma in children that come from affluent backgrounds? Because I have a case investigator that did
Great
34 years in child protective services. And she told me that the worst cases were in the affluent private schools and that a lot of times they would not report it. And are we missing people because we're focusing so much on, certain pockets of children?
I think that's a really great question. And it's definitely something that, so my organization that I work in is Greater Richmond SCAN, Stop Child Abuse Now. So we operate child advocacy centers and a CASA program. So we were working directly with child abuse and neglect. When I was at a meeting recently where they pulled data from the city of Richmond, right, and about where the child protective services calls were coming in from. So it was kind of like they showed kind of a map and they were showing where on the map of the city most of the calls were coming in from. And there were literally like two calls coming from like the west side of the city, which is the more affluent side, the more white side, because Richmond's very segregated, and they were all just kind of in areas where it was more kind of concentrated poverty and things like that. And it's completely skewed because, as you said, when you look at abuse data in general, there is no correlation between abuse and socioeconomic status. You can have, there's absolutely, excuse me, abuse is not correlated with socioeconomic status. Like you can have just as much abuse in someone who's living in poverty as you can in a very affluent area, but it like you said, it often goes unnoticed because I often have to go in and do mandated reporting training. So I go in and so many times preschool settings, or I've gotten a lot of calls recently for summer camps to come and do mandated reporter trainings. And it's just stunning when you're kind of talking to these, especially preschool settings that are in more affluent parts of town. People really don't think that it's going to happen in their classroom or that's going to happen in their camp or in this neighborhood. But like you said, there's just as many. We also get a lot of trafficking cases, like human trafficking cases, and it's not from, communities of poverty. It's from affluent communities as well, where kids are being trafficked. So it's definitely on both sides. But I do think that there is often this connection where we sometimes assume that it's just happening over here on that side of the tracks or this side of the town, but it's absolutely happening in any neighborhood. Any other comments or questions or just next steps as you're thinking about just some of the information that's been shared?
I'd like to add one thing. My name is Lee Campbell, and I'm a prevention specialist at the Eastern Shore Community Services Board. And I'm very new to the position, as in about 2 weeks, so you'll have to forgive my ignorance. But in my trainings, I believe that creating trauma-informed communities is going to start from the bottom up, and it's going to involve all of us becoming more sensitive to each other. And with that in mind, and to kind of tie together what a lot of you have said, I attended a training recently by Ivan Juzang. I think it's Juzang, from a company called Motivational Educational Entertainment. And he made a really good point in expressing the need sometimes for a gatekeeper. For example, I don't have experience. I have experience with trauma, but I don't have any experience with, let's say, racism. I can't approach that conversation intelligently, and this is where Ivan was talking about, having a gatekeeper. I have a great deal of experience with poverty that I can talk to people about, but there are so many things that, I'm probably not credible. And so anyway, he talked about, if any of you get the opportunity to attend one of his workshops, I'm thoroughly convinced that sometimes, while we may think that we're the most educated and most effective people, I think sometimes a gatekeeper is going to be more effective.
It also goes back to when you're thinking about kind of your coalition, that it should be community driven and it should be diverse and inclusive of lots of different, for the exact reason you just shared. That because again, like there's some things that, that we truly are connected to, and we can absolutely speak to from personal experience and because of our own lived experience. And that's why so many different voices matter. So, as you're continuing to develop your coalition and your work groups, just really thinking about who's not there and who needs to be there, and how do we get them there, and how do we create spaces that are safe for people to come and want to be there, and just to know what people's roles can be. And so again, a number of these coalitions that are around the state initially started as professionally driven networks. They started from that lens, but there's a number of coalitions that have started as a community driven effort, and have done a good job of really starting from the beginning, at the community level, and that it's not just, like you said, like leaders of organizations and things like that, setting the tone, because that's not necessarily going to create a safe space for folks to come in and feel like they actually have a voice, or that it'll be valued. Mm-hmm.
He talked about historical mistrust amongst some, cultures and communities, and you're not going to get people engaged if there's a history of mistrust.
How are other? Oh, go ahead, Karen. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Melissa. I'll go after you.
I was just going to share real fast, just, about importance of just having other just community leaders at the table, or faith leaders, or other people that, have a trusting relationship with community, and then using them as the bridge, Go ahead,
Absolutely. I brought that up because I'm sitting here thinking about how, while we white people in the room didn't cause, or none of us in this room caused the historical harms ourselves, but mean that we're not responsible in the present day. So what I'm thinking about is how we do become better informed about white dominant culture and the ways that it continues to harm all of us in the present day. So I agree, like there are places that folks don't trust me, and I wouldn't expect them to. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a responsibility to learn. And that reminds me of, like, here on the Eastern Shore, the whole born here, come here relationship, and how, like, if you don't know the community, you may have good ideas, but the voices of the community leaders, in my, I support community leaders that have the trust of the community and have the voice, and maybe over time refine how, in partnership and collaboration, like some of my ideas may have a place.
The thing that I wanted to mention that we often overlook is the issue of class, even within the diverse communities. So when Lee was talking about gatekeepers, and we're talking about trust and stuff, and bringing the local leaders to the fore, sometimes we don't even know who they are. A lot of times the assumption that I see made is that if it's a person of color and they're in the group, then they represent everybody. My experience has been working with an organization is that it is exceptionally challenging to get to the grassroots folks that we think we need to be most concerned about, to bring them to the table for any number of reasons. There have even been times when, let's say at the school board meeting, people have promised to come and, you know, talk about their issues so that, you know, we could have a more credible presentation. They just simply didn't show. So I think this is a very complex issue that we just have to keep working at. I mean, it's just going to take a lot of time, but it's very, very complex because we're dealing with culture, we're dealing with class, we're dealing with our own issues. I remember sitting in one of our meetings, and Eastern Shore Health and Communities meetings, and someone said, a person asked, who here knows any poor people? And we looked around the room. You might remember that, Kathy, you may have been at that meeting. Nobody answered. I mean, so we're kind of removed, kind of out of touch, the whole kind of class thing. So I just, you know, I'm agreeing with what's been being said. All I'm saying is that it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of work, and it's really a challenge, even though it's something that we need to do. The thing that I do want to just also, in terms of what you said, Melissa, is I think that what happened to you versus what's wrong with you is a really important perspective to come from, because I just see that a lot in terms of the judgment that people come to people with. So they think they're being sensitive and compassionate, but even within the work that I've seen, we do things that I would consider to be demeaning to the population that we're working with in terms of how we interact with them. So it's complex. I'm done.
I appreciate all your comments. Thank you.
Just want to say, I appreciate everybody being honest. I think we need to be more honest and not be afraid to say what you really feel. Karen, I really appreciate what you said. That took a lot of guts. People are so, you know, worried about hurting people's feelings and this and that. But yeah, we need to do more of that. So that was great.
Thank you, Tracy.
The other thing we need to do is we need to go where the issue is. When my husband was the town manager in Onancock, and which was the neighborhood we lived, it was the northeast section. And we lived in that neighborhood, and there was some things that needed some work. It had been ignored. And so a group of us got together and we're trying to figure out, was there grants? There's some houses that need to come down. There's some people who needed help. And our first meeting was at town hall. Well, I mean, that's 5 blocks from where these people live, but it's not their neighborhood, And so when we changed where we were meeting with these people to discuss their needs, suddenly the community came out. When we went to a local church, and which, was great for me because, it was a block away as opposed to 4 blocks in the other direction. You have to remember to meet them on, their turf. So if something's happening and there's, trauma, they're not going to leave where they're comfortable. They're going to want to be someplace where they're comfortable. They're going to want to be at their local church in their neighborhood. And so that's, another thing is, don't just automatically think, oh, well, this is a nice conference room, because that doesn't work for everybody. You have to experiment a little bit and see, what works. And, don't forget that just because your first meeting doesn't turn out okay, don't quit, move the venue.
I agree with what you just said. I think that access and barriers are real. And, you have meetings and you have even different groups, but if a person can't get there and it's not accessible for them to even watch it and engage, you send a link, oh, you can watch it and email your input. Well, what if you're in a community that has poor internet service? So I think accessibility, it might be a newer type of trauma, but accessibility through just the digital divide is a big problem, especially I'm kind of new to Lower Eastern Shore area, and it was amazing. My husband's from Accomack, and just the lack of internet. You're running off of hotspots and you have to go maybe to your local library, and that's unfortunate because if you have a meeting at 7 o'clock, well, the library's probably closed. So you can't go to some of these places to even be able to engage.
That's something I think would be phenomenal if we could focus on building internet access on the shore. That would help so many communities have access to taking online classes, working remote, just so many different things. If we could do that, that would be great. I think other states have done that, in response to the pandemic. And I'd like to see us look more at infrastructure as well.
I know there are meetings, Northampton's meeting is tonight. I'm not sure when Accomack County's meeting is. Malika, do you know, related to broadband internet and how the counties may be eligible for large grant monies?
I don't have that information. Karen Downing, which I'm sure some folks who have access to could get that information, but there are a number of people who are working on this already. They've been working on it for months.
I have the email. I can go look and see when those meetings are specifically, if you'd like me to.
Tracy, she's talking to you, I think.
No, that's
But
okay.
people are
Are they
working
Are they
I
going
have
to
a date.
neighborhoods? Are they going to put it in neighborhoods though? Because that's what I'm thinking. That's what they did in Maryland. They put it in actual socioeconomically deprived neighborhoods. They put in internet, so people that could not afford to pay for internet, they had access to it.
Well, see, that's in theory. What I know about people's personal responses, and even me trying to call, I'm right off of 13. So no one comes to me. There was a big meeting with providers and about this I guess 2 months ago, and everyone's claiming they're going to come here, but it's very haphazard. you know, and the conversation is still going to be, where are they going to be, you know, providing access. They have a plan that we have yet to get really good access to. What we're fighting for is what you're talking about, Tracy, but I don't see that happening anytime soon, but we're still fighting for that. That's what we're still trying to get them to do.
So if I could jump in, Northampton County tonight, 5 p.m., Accomack, Wednesday, June 2nd at 6 p.m. And does not say where, but you can go to those meetings and say you need to be in the communities. I'm sure they're in their county chambers, but anyway.
But this is an excellent example of when we're talking about just like building a more resilient community, and then some of these practices that are happening in our community that are adding more trauma that you can mobilize around. So like you said, even just issues with access to internet and broadband and things like that, and how we can then mobilize to improve that. You think that even like in Richmond, you know, there's been a lot of push around just the food deserts that are happening in like so many of our communities, and just that lack of access to healthy food and options like that, or we mobilize around, you know, the schools, or I mean, it can be any, for us too, is bus lines. Like the bus lines weren't going to where the jobs were. So really being able to kind of mobilize around a specific issue that's impacting your community, and kind of using, again, like this multi-sector, community involved approach, you know, can make a tremendous impact. But it's just like we've just done today on our call, just starting to identify like what are some of those problems, or what are some of those issues that we want to tackle. And you're going to come up with a lot, but which can also feel really overwhelming, but you got to pick one and start, you know, and really just kind of starting somewhere. We have a few more minutes left. I definitely want to give a plug for, if you are interested in coming to the Train the Trainer, we're going to keep it fairly informal. It's not going to be just another presentation that you're sitting in. It's really going to be more of a dialogue. So you'll have access to all of the slides, but it's really to just talk about kind of what we're building on, what we're talking about today, just about, you know, lessons learned that you may have learned kind of when presenting, you know, in different, with different groups or organizations or individuals, and just really kind of sharing just some of the things that you might want to include when talking about these topics, things to consider, things that might come up. So we're going to kind of go over kind of all of those things during our training. So we really encourage you to bring questions, comments, ideas, but yeah. All right. So Patty, that's all I have for today. Did you have any last thoughts for the group?
Yes, I do. Just to remind you that the Train the Trainer, again, is June 23rd, 10 a.m. to noon. And that the next Eastern Shore Healthy Communities Resilient and Trauma-Informed Communities Work Group is June 8th at 1 p.m. And that's where we're going to begin to, you know, work some of these issues out. I think for us as an organization, we are trying to get as many people aware of and articulate in what does it mean to be a trauma-informed individual, so that they can then go to their organization that they work for or they interact with to try and inject trauma-informed organizational principles. And then knitted together, we hope that we can become a trauma-informed community and be able to help our institutions that deal on the full community level, like county boards of supervisors, county school boards, town councils, help them to also understand the benefit, the productivity, the just how it lifts everyone to become a trauma-informed community. But there are so many issues to work out along the way. It's a culture change, as has been stated here, and that takes a long time. So we're going to be patient, and we're going to be culturally humble with each other, and we're going to try and take this a step at a time. Hopefully, there's some big news on the horizon, working with community partners on this. Lee Campbell and I were on the phone yesterday, and I'm looking forward to learning more about, having everyone learn more about what's going on within the CSB. Melissa, again, we cannot thank you enough for sharing the benefit of your experience and your wisdom. I have a million questions to ask you, but they're all personal, so I'm not going to do it here. And we look forward to welcoming you back on June 23rd.